May these faithful members rest in peace. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Leonard Skonecki for our featured speaker. Known Leonard for a long time. He's been at every Memorial Day presentation here in Fostoria that I can remember. And with that, Leonard Skonecki.
Good morning. Words cannot convey how privileged I am to be here with you in this place on this day. Today is Memorial Day. Those of us gathered here to remember and pay our solemn respects to our veterans, Fostoria's veterans who have passed on, are partaking in a tradition that reaches back over a century and a half into Fostoria's history, to Fostoria's first Memorial Day that was observed in 1869, 153 years ago, just 4 years after the Civil War. The Holocaust survivor and author Elie Wiesel said, "Without memory, there is no culture. Without memory, there would be no civilization. And without memory, there is no future." This day we gather to remember. The first national observance of Memorial Day took place as General Logan ordered on May the 30th, 1868. The observance was held at Arlington National Cemetery. One of the speakers was General James Garfield, future President of the United States. He addressed a crowd of over 5,000. He said, "I am oppressed with a sense of impropriety of uttering words upon this occasion. If silence is ever golden, it must be here, beside the graves of 15,000 men whose lives were more significant than speech and whose death was a poem, the music of which will never be sung." In May 1869, 2 meetings were held in Fostoria to plan our first Memorial Day. Civil War veteran Frank Stewart presided. June the 13th, a Sunday, was selected as the date. A procession formed at 11 a.m. at the Methodist Episcopal Church, the site of Governor's Manor today. The vanguard of the parade was comprised of soldiers and Union veterans. There followed a line of 150 carriages and wagons that stretched a mile. The march ended here at Fountain Cemetery. They gathered then exactly where we gather today. Ministered offered prayers, and a choir sung hymns. The speaker that day was Ohio Lieutenant Governor John Lee. Colonel Lee commanded the 55th Ohio Volunteer Infantry Regiment, which fought at Second Bull Run, Chancellorsville, and a dozen other battles. Many Fostoria men served in the 55th OVI. Lee said the Union victory was a blessing to the world. It broke the shackles off 4 million enslaved human beings and made them what God intended all people to be, free men and women. Lieutenant Governor Lee said, "Then let us on this solemn occasion rise above all party or sectional prejudices and render to the memory of those who fell on the battlefield or died in Southern prisons or in hospitals or on the weary march that tribute of respect that is due to the memory of those who, when the liberties of the country were in danger, sacrificed the comforts of home and left dear friends and boldly went forth and gave their lives that the nation might live." On that long ago June Sunday, there were 34 Union soldiers buried here, soldiers who were killed in battle or died in prison camps or hospitals. The grave of each was decorated with an American flag embroidered with his name. 40 small girls, all in white dresses, carried wreaths, evergreens, and flowers. They went to each of the soldiers' graves and decorated them. Hundreds of others in attendance followed after them and did the same. But there were also 116 Fostorian area soldiers who had died in the war and were buried far from home, many of their resting places being unknown. In their memory, a mound had been built up and planted in grass in the center of the cemetery. 116 flags, also embroidered with their names, were placed upon the mound. The 40 young girls formed a circle around the mound. All but 4 advanced and placed wreaths and flowers along the perimeter of the mound. Then the other 4 girls walked onto the mound and placed their flowers at special flags. Each of those 4 girls had lost her father, a father who had died far from home and whose final resting place was forever lost. It is estimated that nearly 400,000 Union soldiers died in the Civil War and that the remains of half of them were never identified. In her wars, America has lost soldiers whose remains cannot be identified or perhaps even located. For that reason, in 1921, a white marble sarcophagus located on a hilltop overlooking the nation's capital was dedicated to the memory of such casualties. It was the tomb of the unknown soldier, often called the Tomb of the Unknowns. Its inscription reads, "Here rests in honored glory an American soldier known but to God." The purpose of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier was to bring home the body of an unknown American warrior who in himself represents no section, creed, or race in the late war, and who typifies, moreover, the soul of America and the supreme sacrifice of her heroic dead. Initially the resting place of a single World War I soldier, today the tomb now also honors unknowns from World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. When the first unknown, whose remains had been removed from an American military cemetery in France, was interred, there was a procession across the Potomac River to Arlington National Cemetery. President Warren Harding placed the Congressional Medal of Honor on the casket. Across the nation, Americans observed 2 minutes of silence. President Harding said this of the unknown soldier: "On such an occasion as this, amid such a scene, our thoughts alternate between defenders living and defenders dead. A grateful republic will be worthy of them both. Our part is to atone for the losses of the heroic dead by making a better republic for the living." For over 100 years, the Tomb of the Unknowns has served as a place of mourning and commemoration, a site for somber reflection upon the meaning and value of military service. The tomb reminds us that though the names of some of the fallen may be lost to history, their spirit, valor, sacrifice, and devotion to duty are not lost. Here at Fountain Cemetery, we have memorials to honor the service of Fostoria's sons and daughters. The Veterans Memorial Chapel, dedicated in 2004 as part of the city's sesquicentennial, the Vietnam War Memorial, and the Duquesne Spirit of the American Doughboy, dedicated shortly after World War I. A fourth memorial, the first, was dedicated to a man who was present at Fostoria's first Memorial Day in 1869. He fought in the Civil War, he died in Fostoria, his remains lie here in Fountain Cemetery, but he is present today in another way as well. The monument with the Civil War Union soldier mounted atop is called the Soldier's Monument. It was erected in memory of Private John M. Linhart. Private Linhart lived in Virginia when the Civil War broke out, but Private Linhart lived in West Virginia, which did not secede from the Union. It parted with the Confederacy, formed its own government, and in 1863 became the state of West Virginia. Private Linhart stood with his fellow West Virginians. He would fight for liberty and for freedom. He would not take up arms in defense of the proposition that one human being could own another. He would not fight to see the United States of America rent asunder. He enlisted in Company H of the 7th West Virginia Volunteer Infantry Regiment. The 7th was known as the Bloody 7th. The 7th fought in more engagements and suffered more losses than any other West Virginia regiment. In September 1862, Confederate forces crossed into Maryland at a place called Antietam. As part of the 2nd Corps of the Army of the Potomac, the 7th West Virginia was charged with driving entrenched rebels from heavily fortified positions along a place called the Sunken Road. The 7th commenced its attack at 10 o'clock in the morning of September 17th. By sunset, over 5,000 soldiers lay killed or wounded on the battlefield. One of them was Private Linhart, and Sunken Road would afterwards be known as Bloody Lane. As the 7th advanced, a Confederate round grazed Private Linhart's head. He bore the scar of that wound the rest of his life. Nonetheless, he pressed forward. Then a second bullet tore his cartridge belt and ripped it from his body. A third round pierced his left arm above his wrist and exited the other side. Bleeding from his arm and head and in terrible pain, Private Linhart was losing consciousness. Now he struggled to reach medical aid, but Private Linhart wasn't quite through with the enemy just yet. Retreat from the battlefield he did, but as he did, he refused to turn around. Twice wounded, without ammunition, and with one arm useless, he walked backwards, still carrying his rifle, facing the enemy at each step. Wounded as he was, he would not have anyone think him a coward. On September the 17th of 1862, Private John M. Linhart was all of 20 years old. Private Linhart was one of 23,000 soldiers killed or wounded at Antietam. The casualties so overwhelmed the doctors that by the time Private Linhart was treated, It was necessary to amputate his arm below the elbow. His family moved to Hancock County after the war. He later moved to Fostoria. He became a grocer. Private Linhart died in 1907. In 1910, his wife Rachel donated $2,500 to the Fostoria post of the Grand Army of the Republic for the white granite monument that stands 21 feet tall. Private Linhart was ill for some months before his death, and he knew his end was near. He had told Rachel that it was his wish that a memorial be built to honor the comrades he would soon join in death and the comrades he would soon leave behind in this world. The Soldiers' Monument was dedicated 111 years ago in 1911. The Battle of Antietam halted Robert E. Lee's attempt to invade the North. The sacrifice of Private Linhart and all the other Union men who shed blood, were wounded, or gave their lives there gave President Abraham Lincoln the opportunity to issue the Emancipation Proclamation that ended slavery throughout all of the United States. It is deeds and service such as that that we remember today. During World War II, President Franklin Roosevelt said, "Those who have long enjoyed such privileges as we enjoy forget in time that men have died to win them." Each year, Memorial Day is the antidote to forgetting. It is a renewal of remembrance. In the Civil War, Private Linhart lost an arm at Sunken Road. In World War I, Fostoria American Legion Post namesake Earl Faust was killed in action in a place called the Meuse-Argonne in Europe. In World War II, Fostorian George Fallowidge was killed in action in a place called Bougainville in the Solomon Islands. In the Korean War, Fostorian David Momfer, a prisoner of war, died in a place called Man-po in Korea. Long ago, the names of those places were the stuff of headlines. Today, they no longer echo in memory. Only a tiny few remember them. But to the soldiers who long ago fought in those places and many others, some equally obscure, the names never faded. Our most recent memorial to Fostoria's deceased veterans is the Vietnam War Memorial. At the base in the front of the memorial are the names of 54 soldiers from Seneca, Hancock, and Wood counties who were killed in action, remain missing in action, or who died as POWs. On the back of that memorial are engraved the names of other places that were also once in the forefront of events: Da Nang, the Mekong Delta, Long Binh, China Beach. Today, fewer and fewer can recall them or other names like Hue, Khe Sanh, or Pleiku, but there are men among us here today at Memorial Day 2022 for whom those names and others do not fade. Instead, those names possess a timeless clarity. They are the names of life and death places. They are places where men faced awful terror, where they lost friends and comrades, and where some gave the last full measure of devotion. And they endured those things because the nation asked it of them. There are veterans here whose memory of those names and what happened there and what they did there will remain vivid so long as they draw breath. Over more than 240 years in all of those places and many more, Americans have fought for the ideal of freedom. Many have not come home, but the America whose call to arms they answered yet endures. The blessings we enjoy living in this country make manifest the words written by a man named Thomas Campbell. The patriot's blood is the seed of freedom's tree. In remembering that last full measure, General George S. Patton said that yes, we can mourn the men who died, but they merit an even nobler remembrance. Rather, said Patton, we should thank God that such men lived. The following item appeared in the Fostoria News on June the 18th, 1869, 5 days after our first Memorial Day. During the decoration of soldiers' graves on last Sabbath, we observed a young widow approach the grave of her departed husband and deposit upon his grave a wreath of evergreens and flowers. Then, seating herself at the foot of the grave and with bowed head, offer up a silent prayer. Although hundreds were at that very time engaged in strewing flowers on graves, we could not help reflecting that in this act there was something noble and becoming. She had willingly parted with her husband when he went forth at the call of his country. Now she places the sprig of acacia upon his grave as an emblem that his memory is held sacred by her, and as a representation of that immortal spirit which will never die. May those two loved ones yet be permitted to meet one day in a place where parting will be no more. On June the 13th, 1869, those Fostorians cherished the memory of the soldiers lost in the war between the states. It would please them to know that after 153 years, we make common cause with them, and we remember still. Thank you.
Let's see, Bob and Mary